Indira Gandhi once said, "The power to question is the basis of all human progress." And with that in mind, I'm about to ask you one of the most important questions that you have ever been asked. And the way you choose to answer that question will chart the course for your health, good or bad, from this day forward. And the question is this: what's your story about your health? Chances are everyone in this room has faced some sort of a health challenge, major or minor, at some point in their life. And all too often, when we're talking about a health challenge, the story is about a fight. It could be, I'm fighting off a cold, or I'm always struggling with my weight. Or it might even be something like, my doctor says I have to be a fighter if I want to survive this. I think we can come up with a better story. And I'll illustrate that by telling you my story. My first career was as an officer in the U.S. Marine Corps. That's me in the front of the picture. I was physically fit. I was a rising star in a profession that I loved, and I was having the time of my life. But early in my career, life threw me a wicked curveball. I started to notice pain in one of my hips. And at first, I didn't pay much attention to it. I thought it would just go away on its own, but it didn't. It just kept getting worse. And soon, it was interfering with my ability to meet the physical requirements of the Marine Corps. So I went to the doc to have him check it out, and he diagnosed a type of progressive inflammatory arthritis that's similar to rheumatoid arthritis. The image flashed into my mind of my grandfather, who had been bent over with rheumatoid arthritis from the time he was a young man. That was not going to be me, no way. I resolved right then to fight that disease, and I was determined to beat it. The fight became my story. But fight as I may, it kept getting worse, and eventually the Marines had to say, "Sorry, Mark, good job, thanks for your service. Here's your honorable discharge." Now fast forward. This is me today. I'm a trail runner. I practice martial arts. I'm a snowboarder. I'm active, I'm fit, and I'm having the time of my life. When I tell people my story, they ask the question that's running through a lot of your minds right now. How did you do it? And my answer is that it wasn't what I did that turned my health around. It was when I changed my story that my health and my life were able to change. What I did for years was fight. I had come to think of my arthritis as the beast, and I tried everything, looking for that silver bullet that would kill the beast. But it kept getting worse. I got to the point where I was virtually crippled. Every morning, I went through an agonizing 5-minute ordeal to go from lying on my back in bed to struggling to sit up on the side of the bed, to standing up and wobbling, and finally, to take my first painful steps of the day. I remember one morning, I felt like I just could not take it anymore. Lying there in bed, I looked up and I said to God, "Hey God, come on, enough is enough. Either cure me or take me." And I got an answer right away, a clear answer. Cure yourself or take yourself. That was not the answer that I was looking for, but it turned out to be exactly the answer that I needed because it moved me to change my story. I looked back at my war with arthritis, and I realized that the disease wasn't something separate from me that had attacked me. It was part of me. And when I was battling the beast, I was only fighting myself. So I stopped fighting. That doesn't mean that I gave up, not at all. I simply changed my story from fighting to thriving. Now, I wish I could tell you that when I had that epiphany, the clouds parted, angels sang, I basked in a beam of divine golden light and danced away, free of pain for the rest of my life. But that's not what happened. For a while, I was in just as much pain as before, and I continued to have ups and downs with the disease just as I had in the past. It wasn't until several years later that I had a miraculous transformation in my health, and I found myself able to run again for the first time in over 11 years. And within a couple of years, I was running triathlons, and I even ran a marathon. And it was changing my story more than anything else that led to that healing miracle. And that's why I invite you to adopt a new story about your health. Stop fighting and start thriving. Fighting includes anger, fear, and ego. And those are normal human responses, but we can choose not to be driven by them and instead be guided by love. When we fight, our physiology changes. And a great example of that is something that happened to me back in the year 2000 when I was visiting India. One day my group went to an ancient fortress that happened to have a large population of monkeys. And at one point I got too close to a female monkey that had a baby with her, and she felt threatened and attacked me. This Kodak moment was captured just as I was jumping away. And you can't see it in the picture, but my right arm had several deep, bloody gashes in it that were left behind by the monkey's sharp fingernails. When the monkey attacked me, my fight or flight response kicked in. My vision and my hearing became sharper. My mental ability became more focused. My heart rate and respiratory rate increased. More blood flowed to my muscles, and my metabolism surged to give me the burst of energy that I needed to jump out of the way. At the same time, my digestive and immune functioning decreased. Those weren't necessary at that moment. I had to get out of there. And then when I was safely away from the monkey, all of those functions gradually came back to their normal state of balance. Now, notice one very important thing here. The functions that are suppressed during fight or flight are the same ones that are necessary for healing and growth. And what that means is when you are fighting, you're not healing. Fight or flight is great in short bursts when you need it. But if you don't lighten up, you open the door to a whole host of health problems, including the diseases that you're fighting. On the other hand, if you can take yourself out of the fighting mode and spend most of your time in a state of relaxation and balance, that enhances your health. Thousands of studies have shown that things like meditation, prayer, positive thinking, laughter, fun, and love have all of these health benefits. Our pursuit of health today is so much about the fight. Just take a look at these headlines that I've seen recently. Foods that fight the flu. Use yoga to combat stress. Weight loss is war. Those headlines show us that the fighting mentality is common not just in conventional medicine, but in alternative medicine as well. True, food, yoga, and other natural approaches can be fundamentally different from drugs and surgery, but using them to fight is the same story as using drugs and surgery to fight. So let's change the story. Food doesn't know how to fight. Food just nourishes and strengthens you. Yoga has never been a form of combat, but it is an excellent way to take yourself out of the fighting mode and give yourself time to heal and to grow and to thrive. You can take advantage of conventional and alternative medicine without fighting. For example, several weeks back, I was accidentally jabbed right in the eyeball with a stick really hard. And you know that thing that mothers like to say that we usually just laugh off? Be careful, you'll poke someone's eye out. Well, apparently our mothers know what they're talking about. Now, my eye wasn't exactly poked out, but it was a serious injury, and oh man, did it hurt. And I gotta tell you, these days I have deep gratitude for things like emergency rooms and antibiotics, including, in this case, natural antibiotics and pain medication. Notice I didn't say painkillers. I didn't use any of those things to fight. Through all of the pain and all of the fear, I held the mindset and the heart space of healing and self-love. Okay, hopefully by now you're thinking, I want to start thriving. What am I supposed to do? Well, remember early in my presentation, I said that when people hear my story, they ask me how I did it. And my answer is that what I did wasn't as important as how I changed my story. That is the crucial point that I need to stress here. Your new story, in other words, your mindset, must come first before any sort of to-do list. I wrote a book about this, and the entire first half of the book is all about how to create a healing mindset. And it's not until I have laid that all-important foundation that I even begin to build on it with the things you need to do. Early in my journey with arthritis, I hadn't laid that foundation. And I did lots of healthy stuff for years. Yet I still sunk to the depth of pain and despair where I asked God to put me out of my misery. Here's something I'd like you to remember. Doing makes things happen, but it's the story behind the doing that determines what happens. Now let's get to some examples of how I have changed my story. In the past, I would choose foods because a friend or maybe a magazine article or even a doctor told me that those foods fought inflammation. But now, I don't worry about the inflammation or any other problem. I simply pay attention to which foods make me feel vibrant. I practice a martial art called Aikido, and the word Aikido breaks down like this. I means harmony, Ki means spirit or life force, and Do is a way or a path. So Aikido, a martial art, is literally the way of harmony and spirit. I've heard Aikido described as a martial art in which you use your opponent's energy against them. But Aikido isn't about using anything against anybody. My sensei teaches that in Aikido, when you're attacked, you receive the energy of the attack and you transform it and you send it back to the attacker as love. Now, that doesn't mean that you're passive in the face of an attack. The attack itself is just one small part of a much bigger picture. You can respond to the attack however you need to without anger, fear, and ego, and within the larger picture of harmony and love. So you know all of that energy that you're putting into fighting your health problems, in other words, fighting yourself, you can choose right now to transform that energy and send it back to yourself as love. Bruce Lipton, PhD, wrote an excellent book called The Biology of Belief. And in that book, he says, you can live a life of fear or live a life of love. You have the choice. And he goes on to say that if you choose to see a world full of love, your body will respond by growing in health. If you choose to believe that you live in a dark world full of fear, your body's health will be compromised as you physiologically close yourself down in a protection response. One of the most important things I did when I changed my story was I stepped away from that dark world full of fear and into a world full of love. I stopped loathing myself as a guy with a debilitating disease, and I started loving myself as a whole, vibrant, thriving being with amazing potential for healing and growth. Let's get back to my story. Remember how I told you that I transformed myself from a virtually crippled arthritic into a marathon runner? Well, a few months ago, after more than 6 years, my arthritis came back. Not as intense as in the past. In fact, I was able to be in denial about it for a while, but after it nagged at me for a few weeks, there was no denying it. It was back. And that was a dark night of the soul for me. Part of me fell right back into that dark world full of fear. And it wasn't just fear about my physical health. A lot of self-doubt showed up too. Everything I've been teaching for years, I wondered, is it even valid? Who's going to believe me now? But then I reminded myself that my new story of thriving came during the darkest days of my life when I was in so much pain that I just wanted to die. And it was that new story that pulled me from that abyss. The important part of my story here is not that I was able to run a marathon. Most important of all is that I learned to focus on my potential instead of my pain, and to live the best life that I can live, whatever that may look like. That's my story about my health. And that brings us back to the question we started with. What's your story about your health? I have one call to action for you today, and that is for you to decide how you are going to write the rest of your story. It's up to you. Are you going to stick with your old story, the fight? Or are you ready to start a new chapter? A chapter based on thriving. I invite you to thrive. Thank you.